So you mentioned about having a number of napkins, each representing these different businesses that you've played a part in creating, and that's such a difference in mindset from a generation ago, where you join a company, you work 50 years later, you retire with a gold watch. How how do you know that it's time for you to embark on a new path?
Well, so let's take two of these scenarios as examples. The first scenario, again, we were at NCR. We had finished turning around the core, long story, finished turning around the core business. So now we were looking at how we were going to build growth. What new things were coming over the horizon, and I had been saddled with a long-term development project. Uh, that was the love of our group vice president. Nobody else believed in it, but he did. And we successfully, over time, had changed its scope to get it to be more uh, acceptable from a market perspective. But along the way, we created and I know it sounds kind of old tech now,
Hmm.
but back then we created a survivable edge computing vehicle that was very communications based. And this is back in the 70s. Okay. And this was, and now the application for this in the retail environment generally was something else, right? But we came across this and we had a customer approach us and saying, we have this problem of needing the ability to communicate effectively with local devices and IBM host, and do so in a way where we have flexibility on what type of local devices we use. In other words, you want to simulate, and back then it was simulating an IBM, terminal XYZ or whatever. And so we took this dual redundant, survivable little platform that was designed for something else. It was very communication centric.
Hmm.
So we said, look, let's just take that, and remember, there are no routers. No one had ever thought about it. And we'll make it a device that will convert, it'll convert from whatever terminal type they have at the local facility into an IBM X, which means in some cases the terminal will be operating as a CRT in some cases.
Hmm.
In some cases, they were operating as a transaction terminal, and we would disperse that. But we would also be able to manage multiple sessions simultaneously, so that essentially we could support, 30 or 40 devices all doing different things in this network. And when we thought that was a good idea, the customer came over, we did a proof of concept, again, a zero R&D project, proof of concept, and the customer fell in love with it. And essentially that visit wrote a contract, and it ended up being one of the largest contract our business unit had ever signed. That had nothing to do with retail systems, point of sale devices. It had all to do about computing engines and edge devices.
And
And that thing deployed over, again, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment. It was sold to a number of other businesses. And it really, if you think about it, it really was that age's version of a router. I mean, that's
right,
essentially what it was.
right before the
All
time of
started with a
IP
napkin.
addresses.
Napkin and about 3 glasses of wine for each of us, or 3 beers, and a problem that essentially we could not. We were trying to find a way out of a box, and we were looking at our tool sets. We were looking at the opportunities and try to evolve that.
So as you said, it's that situational awareness of realizing that if you're having this problem solving, if you're having this trouble solving a problem, other people are too. If you can find a
Absolutely.
generic solution,
And
run with it.
my second example is much more germane, probably, especially to your cadets. I was running a semiconductor business, a small one, tiny one at the time, Basis Communications. It was tiny. We had one product, which was a systems on a chip. Actually, it was a concept. It wasn't a product. It was a concept. We had a precursor of it that we sold actually very successfully to some of the early stage TV devices. It was some of the early stage Apple devices. Essentially, it was a systems controller, an ARM processor with some communications capability that could be deployed for $8 a chip and got installed, sold pretty well. But we thought, man, there's got to be something more. So one night, again, at dinner with my CTO, well, the gentleman who became my CTO, and one of the senior product marketing managers, we were wrestling with, okay, so we see this opportunity on edge vehicles. How are we going to do that? We weren't analog based. So if you look at how you integrate, remember, you always try to, if you're looking at those kind of opportunities, you always look, what can you integrate? What can you bring in? And if you do the focus, can you do a kind of invention that will make it significantly valued? So on a napkin, actually in this case, probably wasn't a napkin. Actually, I remember now, it was the back of the menus. We were using backs of menus. We figured out that, man, if we tackled the broad, remember, there was no broadband generally deployed, right? Except for T1 lines and T3 lines. I mean, that was it. And could we deploy something that would be for the emerging broadband marketplace, be it cable, DSL, be it fiber, some fiber-based ATM, and whatever the physical transport that would give us the ability to integrate and to implement a systems on a chip strategy at the edge of the network. Making that preamble pretty long, the end result was, a year and a half later, about a year later, we were acquired. But at that point, and we just launched the chip. That chip, even in the recession of 2000, 2001, 2002, was selling at a rate of millions of units a quarter. And the reason it was threefold. One, again, it was very deployed. So if I were I hate to use words, if I was an equipment manufacturer, I could build one software model and deploy it over multiple topologies. Two, we invented in this process of looking at the edge between, in Moore's Law's edge between what we could accomplish in software running a compute engine versus hardware alone. We invented micro engines, which were low-level, essentially are low-level programmable engines that essentially did a lot of the work at the lower layer 2 levels in communications protocols. So that gave us the flexibility, not only the flexibility to move topologies, but it also let us adapt to environments just by using software. These micro engines sit here and they feed the general purpose processor, usually an ARM here, right? That did the general computing issue, analysis for that edge device. And these are cable modems. These are set-top boxes. These are, in the military, in the aerospace and defense world, physical topology classified, but they needed some compute engine above to do a lot of their applications.
I'm seeing a pattern. You don't build the device and then create the market. You look for a market that's not served and you create the device for it.
Yeah, in that case we did, and in
the IBM terminal too.
Right. So from that example was a survival case. We had to figure out something beyond we realized, being a tiny company, that our ability to sustain our presence in the likes of an Apple or in the likes, was short-lived. We were available. They were able to use our stuff, but we figured as soon as they got to a point of any, real volume, they would design us out. The same thing, whereas this little chip that we had found its way into a lot of MP3 recording devices. And we knew, again, those big companies, be it Samsung or Motorola or whatever, or Sony, loved our device day one, but we figured pretty quickly they would engineer us out. They would do their own thing.
Or buy you out.
Or buy you out. But none of those were acquisitive companies. We knew that.
Right.
So we tried to say, what can we use with this platform, and what were the opportunity sets? And again, on the back of menus, we developed what essentially became the architecture, this architectural approach for solving that edge vehicle. And then we were acquired by Intel. One of the things we did is take that same architecture, and they had 2 levels of devices in their pipeline above that. We revamped the architectures of those devices to adapt to our architectural model, but applied on a lot larger scale. Mm-hmm. And those devices are still running in very large, and especially not still running. There's a company that actually bought the license from Intel that have now propelled them into a lot of cyber security vehicles that sit on the edge of the network. Content aware vehicles that sit at the edge of networks.